Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and welcome to INE's CCIE Data Center version 2 Advanced Technologies class. My name is Brian McGahan, and for those of you that have not taken a course from me before, either a live online course or an in-person class, I am a CCIE in Data Center, as well as a couple other ones, and a CCDE. You can see my contact information there. My email is bmcgahan@ine.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Brian McGahan or follow me on LinkedIn. And any questions that you guys have after the course, please feel free to get in touch with me. So before we get started on any technical topics, just a brief overview of the online classroom for those of you that have not attended a live class before. A couple minor features you want to be aware of. One is that at the bottom of the video stream in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a button that you could check to change the stream sampling rate from the content network. So if you have any issues with the video stuttering or start to slow down, you can go down, drop down to the lower bandwidth stream. Additionally, you guys can see the Q&A box on the bottom of the screen. Any questions that you submit there, they're going to be going to me privately. So feel free to ask whatever you want, and then anything that is relevant to us publicly, I'll try to get to those during the individual class sessions. Otherwise, at the end of each of the individual sessions, we'll have a dedicated Q&A for about 10 minutes or so, and then also at the end of the day for any questions that I wasn't able to get to at that point. So during the individual sessions, if you ask a question and I don't get to it, just copy and paste it in at the end of that individual session when we get to the Q&A, because sometimes with the number of questions going by, it scrolls down and then I'm not able to see it when you originally submitted it. Beyond that, the course files is in the upper right-hand portion of the screen. This is going to be where any of the slides, the diagrams, the PDFs, etc., are going to be posted. You should see a couple of them there now, the intro slides that we're going through now, the physical diagram that we're going to be using as we go through the technology examples, and then the first section of slides once we start to talk about just a general overview of the physical hardware platforms for the Nexus switches we're going to be talking about today. Additionally, of course, the class is being recorded. The class recordings generally will be available about a week or so after the live sessions. So figure probably like Monday, Tuesday next week we should be able to start getting them posted. But we will send an announcement out once those are available. Okay, so before we get into technical topics, let's talk a little bit just about the general scope and the format of what we're going to be covering in this particular class. So the course objectives, there's going to be generally two things that we're going to be focusing on. First and foremost is going to be understanding the technologies. So before we look at any of the implementation and the configurations, we want to know why do we need to have this technology? What are the different problems that it's trying to solve? And then the second portion of that is going to be how is it solving those problems? So how do we configure it? How do we verify that the technology is functional? And then when we run into problems, what are the different troubleshooting steps that we can go through in terms of show commands, in terms of debug commands for the different platforms? Because as we know, when you implement something for the very first time, very unlikely that it's going to be working 100%. So just as important as the implementation is going to be the verification and the troubleshooting. So we'll see that everything that is done in this class is going to be live. So when I'm doing the hands-on examples, these are not pre-scripted. So you'll see that generally I will run into problems with some of the topics that we're going through, but the troubleshooting is part of the objective of the class. So I don't have configs that I'm basically copying and pasting in. It's not a pre-recording that you guys are watching. This is a live course. So hopefully we'll have some fun as I start to hit problems. And then, once you start to get better at these technologies, hopefully you'll be able to spot my problems before I can actually solve what I'm causing issues for myself. Now, in general, the overall topic scope for the class, first we're going to start today with some Nexus fundamentals in terms of how do the hardware platforms work, how does just the general OS, the CLI, work a little bit differently than the Catalyst switches. We'll talk about some of the tools that we're going to be using for verifications and troubleshooting throughout the course. How do we do packet captures and look at those in Wireshark? How do we test network flows with different tools like ping, traceroute, TCP and UDP traffic generation with the iPerf application we're going to look at on our virtual machines. Then we'll start to get into the classical Ethernet switching, which the term classical here is going to relate to anything that's not a data center specific switching topic. So things outside of the scope of virtual port channel, fabric path, VXLAN, ACI. So this would be your typical enterprise switching type architecture where you're doing layer 2 switching like regular trunking, access ports down to the access layer, where you have your layer 2 or layer 3 uplinks to your core or distribution switches. And then we'll look at some of the caveats of how Nexus NXOS behaves a little bit differently from Catalyst iOS when we're looking at the specific implementations. Beyond that, we'll then start to get into the data center specific topics. Starting with virtual port channel, which is going to be a way to do active-active forwarding down to the access layer. So allow us to have redundancy plus additional bandwidth so we don't have any standby links that are just sitting there doing nothing. We'll then look at fabric extenders or FEXs that are going to be an extension of the access layer of our distribution or core switches. Or what Catalyst calls instant access. Basically, we have like dumb line cards that are remotely controlled by the upstream parent switches. We'll then look at the first iteration of fabric routing in Nexus, which was called Fabric Path, which is kind of the proprietary implementation of Trill, which was an open standard, transparent interconnection of lots of links. Then we'll look at the layer 3 routing features in terms of our IGP routing, like OSPF, EIGRP, ISIS routing, start to get into BGP routing, which is then going to take us into our next fabric routing or our next overlay fabric routing, which is going to be virtual extensible LAN or VXLAN. Then one of the big topics that everybody is being looking for, actually no, not the next one here. Next one after that is going to be overlay transport virtualization, as well as the location identifier separation protocol or LISP. Okay, those are going to go kind of hand in hand. And then the one that I was mentioned here that kind of everybody's looking for, which is going to be application-centric infrastructure or ACI. So we'll be looking at the Nexus 9K switches and the APIC controller, the application policy infrastructure controller, and how do we manage the switches from the APIC GUI and then program them to do our regular layer 2 switching, layer 3 routing, but from the application point of view as opposed to a network-centric point of view. We'll then start to get into storage networking. So we'll look at SAN switching on the Nexus switches. We'll also look at SAN connectivity on the Unified Computing System or the UCS. So SAN switching and UCS are going to go kind of hand in hand because we can't test the SAN switching or the storage network without some sort of application in order to actually use it. And our application is going to be the UCS Blade series servers, the UCS B servers, and then also the UCS standalone rack mount servers, the C series servers. Beyond that, we'll start to talk about some more miscellaneous features of Nexus and of UCS in terms of quality of service, in terms of network services and management, things like how does NetFlow work in Nexus, how do management protocols like SNMP, NTP, etc. work a little bit differently on those platforms. And then finally, we'll wrap up with some discussion on data center automation and orchestration. Some of the other additional tools that Cisco has, like Cisco UCS Central, UCS Director, Data Center Network Manager, and what specifically do those software packages do from kind of a high-level overview, and then also the implementation, looking at them interacting with both the Nexus switches and then also with the unified computing system. Beyond this, in terms of our release schedule, there were a couple questions here about the recordings. And like I mentioned, the recordings will generally be available about a week after the live sessions. So figure sometime early next week we'll start to be releasing what we are going over now in terms of the kind of the Nexus overview and then also the classical Ethernet. In terms of the lab workbook is currently available now in beta on members.iani.com. So if you go to your regular member site access, let me go ahead and open this up here. Okay, if you go to members.iane.com, and then under workbooks, and then under data center, you should see the data center version 2 lab workbook currently in beta. So I am in the process of currently posting the material for this. A lot of the material is currently in tech editing status right now, so I'm kind of testing it against the new versions of software, the new versions of hardware, make sure that everything is working, and then those topics are being posted incrementally. Of course, what goes along with this is the rack rentals. Okay, a lot of questions about that. Rack rentals are currently in private beta, so I know a bunch of you that are on the class now have been helping me with testing both the equipment and testing the workbook lab, so I appreciate your guys' help with that. Hopefully sometime next week, we're going to be going into public beta. So the rack rentals will be available via the scheduler. You'll be able to book your own sessions, and then the workbook is going to be there so you can work through the sessions that we're doing now in terms of classical Ethernet, VPC, fabric path, etc., all the way through the newer topics for this current blueprint, which would be like the VXLAN Layer 2 gateway, VXLAN Layer 3 gateway, application-centric infrastructure, and then some of the newer features in the newer versions of code and the newer hardware versions that we are dealing with. Okay, so otherwise, before we get into our next section, which is going to be kind of a general overview of the hardware platforms that we're going to be working on, I wanted to take a couple minutes here to answer some just general questions that people had. One here was how much of this can be done in Viral, Cisco's virtual internet routing labs versus the physical labs. Unfortunately, not that much. So you can use, there is a titanium image for NXOS that is built into Viral, but basically you can think of that as kind of just a syntax emulator as opposed, or excuse me, a syntax simulator as opposed to a full platform emulator, because the layer 2 switching features are not available in the titanium image, which is basically 90+% of what we're going to be talking about within the scope of this course. So we will go through layer 3 routing as it relates to other overlay technologies like overlay transport virtualization, VXLAN, and Lisp, but compared to the vast majority of topic scope, most of the things are going to be related to layer 2 switching. So features like virtual port channel, fabric path, VXLAN, those are not going to be supported in the Viral image. But syntax-wise, like you can go to the global config, make the actual config changes, but unfortunately most of that stuff is not going to actually have an impact. You cannot test whether it is going to be working or not. Another question, will this cover most of the CCIE written topics? Yes, most of them will be in there. Because from the blueprint point of view, and actually let me take a look at the blueprint here so we can see what I am referring to. Because the blueprint now is unified both for the written exam and the lab exam. So they don't specifically list what topics are on the written only versus the lab anymore. There is a percentage distribution of kind of the depth of the scope of the topics. Really the only one that is on the written exam and not on the lab is this new section that is under Evolving Technologies. And this I'm going to cover in a separate section that's going to be outside of the scope of Data Center. Because this one here, this goes across all the different technology verticals. So for like the routing and switching exams, service provider security, etc., Evolving Technologies is basically going to be the same for all of them. So our main focus is going to be then the data center specific stuff. Okay, so sections 1 through 5. We will revisit this as we're going through the individual topics and kind of check in to see where our coverage stands. But the flow of class is kind of loosely based on the blueprint, but some of the stuff is kind of out of order. So we're going to start basically from like layer 1 and then work up. But if you have a specific topic that you want to have covered, or have questions about what scope it is within the either the written or the lab exam, just let me know as we go through the class, and I can adjust the topic scope accordingly for that. Okay, this question: what is the recommended What is recommended as far as lab equipment tokens to get through the workbook? Understanding everyone is different, but a rough estimate. That I actually don't know yet, but I will be posting some information about that once the scheduler is public, because I don't know offhand what the amount of tokens is per session. But once I do know that, then I'll put together some estimates as to kind of how many tokens you would need in order to go through all of the labs. The workbook is going to be split up into different sections in terms of rack rentals. So the way that it worked previously, and actually let me draw this out because there were a bunch of questions that were related to this. So in previous data center version 1, the way that we did it in terms of rack rentals was that there was a base topology that included the Nexus 5Ks, the Nexus 7Ks, and then the virtual machines. In data center version 2, this base topology is also going to include the ACI. Okay, so the regular rental, you'll get Nexus 5600s, which are the new version of the layer 2 and layer 3 switches. The Nexus 7Ks with the new F3 line cards that do both the layer 2 and the layer 3 features. The virtual machines that are 10 gig attached to the access switches, which are the Nexus 5Ks, and then also the ACI, which is made up of the Nexus 9300 leaf and spines, and then the API controller, the ACI GUI. Beyond this, there's then going to be two add-ons for the racks. One of them is going to be for the fabric extenders, which is going to be the Nexus 2Ks. And Nexus 2K also is going to be along with the UCS C servers, okay, so like the C200s. And then the second add-in is going to be for the UCS B chassis, which is going to be the UCS fabric interconnects, and then the B chassis with like the B200 blades and so on. So how many tokens you need really depends on the kind of the order that you go through the workbook. So you won't need the fabric extender labs or the fabric extender hardware for all of the labs, and likewise for the UCS. And then at the beginning of each of the lab, it'll tell you what specifically you would need in the rack rentals in order to go through that particular lab. One of the other major changes that we're going to be doing as compared to the last blueprint is that you'll be able to rent multiple racks at the same time in order to build larger topologies. And there's going to be some kind of full-scale labs, quote unquote, that are going to be going through multiple topics at the same time. So kind of building everything from scratch, like you would see in the configuration and troubleshooting section of the actual exam.